break up soon, and I will kill more.
I am a really bad person. I have done terrible things that no one should ever do.
Saying pull the trigger that killed your son, no, right?
There's absolutely no justification for school shootings. What would push a boy to shoot a playground full of first graders, or to chase down another student and kill them execution style? Well, in this video, we'll see how justice prevailed, and the courts gave the worst possible sentences to these criminals, no matter how remorseless or remorseful they were. Jesse Osborne. In 2016, when Osborne was just 14, he attacked a South Carolina elementary school, fatally shooting a 6-year-old boy named Jacob Hall. Mind you, Osborne had already killed his father, Jeffrey Osborne, that same morning. Now, at 21, Jesse is serving life without parole and is asking for a second chance, a sentence review that could offer him the possibility of release in his later years.
I don't exactly know why I did this, but I just ask that you give me hope for a future and get me help, because I do need help.
But this request is met with fierce resistance from those affected by his actions, especially as they remember the pain he inflicted on their community. Jesse's defense attorney, Frank Epps, spoke emotionally in court, asking the judge to give Jesse some hope. Epps argued that Osborne's violent actions were partly fueled by past abuse and trauma, saying that Jesse could be rehabilitated. He urged the judge to consider a psychologist's report that suggests Osborne has shown remorse and could someday reintegrate into society. On the other hand, Jesse himself took the stand to apologize, directing his words to Jacob's family and everyone at Townville Elementary. "I would just like to say sorry to every single one of them," he said, showing regret for his evil actions and pledging to work on himself within the prison walls. But for those who lived through the horror of that day, Jesse's apology doesn't bring peace. Principal Denise Fredericks spoke of Jesse roaming the playground with a loaded gun until police arrived, recounting her belief that he was ready to take more lives had his weapon not malfunctioned. The prosecutors reminded the court that Osborne had gone to the school that day, intending to cause mass harm. His plan had been chillingly premeditated. After killing his father, he even kissed his pets goodbye before stealing a truck and driving straight to Townville Elementary. However, Osborne's defense presented a psychologist's report that contradicted the prosecution's portrayal of him as a remorseless and manipulative person. According to the defense, Jesse's brain was still developing as a teenager, and he has shown signs of guilt, grief, and improvement since his arrest. The defense suggested a reduced sentence, 30 years for the 2 murders, followed by 15 more years for the injuries to others, with a chance for release under GPS monitoring in his later years. This, they argue, would still hold him accountable while allowing for the possibility of redemption. The judge, while not yet reaching a decision, requested a more comprehensive report from the defense's psychologist and will allow the prosecution time to respond. For many of those affected, though, the scars left by that day remain too deep to imagine Osborne ever walking free.
September 28th, my biggest fear during recess was a child falling and getting hurt. Because of the actions of Jesse Osborne, recess will never be the same.
Teacher Megan Hollingsworth, who was celebrating a student's birthday when the shooting occurred, still struggles to stay calm when she hears children's voices raised in excitement. She asked the judge to remember a sign hanging in her classroom that reads, "You are free to choose, but you are not free from the consequences of your choices." Those words ring true, especially for our next case, where this school shooter showed absolutely no remorse during sentencing.
The defendant is a killer. The defendant is remorseless.
Devin Erickson. On May 7, 2019, students at STEM School Highlands Ranch, Colorado, faced terror when 16-year-old Alec McKinney and 18-year-old Devin Erickson, both students, launched a brutal attack on their classmates. Hidden weapons in guitar cases, they entered the school around 1:53 p.m., determined to carry out a pre-planned shooting that would leave one student, Kendrick Castillo, dead and 8 others injured. McKinney and Erickson split up. Erickson entered a high school classroom, pulled out his gun, and yelled, "Nobody move!" Kendrick Castillo bravely rushed Erickson, trying to stop him. Tragically, Kendrick was fatally shot in the chest, but his sacrifice allowed 2 other students to subdue Erickson, stopping more harm. At the same time, McKinney was targeting the middle school area, injuring several students before being apprehended.
I want to put the name of Devin Erickson to rest. I never want to think of him again. I never want to speak his name again. He will be gone to me. Only the beautiful sound of Kendrick Castillo and all of the survivors and the good people and the people that help. No longer him, ever again. You can't have this.
The police responded within minutes, thanks to a direct radio link to the sheriff's dispatch. When authorities searched the suspect's car, they found tactical gear, and a bomb squad was deployed as a precaution. McKinney admitted to planning the attack, motivated by past bullying over his gender identity and a desire to make others suffer as he felt he had. He confessed he'd been tormented by dark thoughts since childhood. Erickson claimed he went along with the plan out of fear, saying McKinney threatened him. Chilling messages like "the voices win" were found in Erickson's home, hinting at possible mental health struggles. Both had reportedly used cocaine before the attack. Charged with first-degree murder and other serious offenses, McKinney and Erickson faced different outcomes in court. McKinney accepted a plea deal, admitting to 17 charges. Due to his age, he was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 40 years, provided he maintained good behavior and participated in rehabilitation. Erickson pleaded not guilty, claiming coercion, but McKinney testified against him, saying they had both planned the attack. In June 2021, Erickson was convicted of 46 counts, including murder and attempted murder, and was sentenced to life without parole plus 1,282 years. During sentencing, the judge remarked that Erickson showed little remorse, only showing emotion when his family discussed his life before the attack.
I want to choose my verb tenses very carefully. The defendant is a killer. The defendant is remorseless in planning.
Given a chance to speak, Erickson declined. Now, both attackers remain incarcerated, McKinney in the Denver Women's Correctional Facility and Erickson in the Centennial Correctional Facility. However, unlike Erickson, this next school shooter felt remorse, but too little, too late.
The scars on their bodies and their minds that I can never erase or take back.
Caleb Sharp. On September 13, 2017, a quiet morning at Freeman High School in Rockford, Washington, was shattered when then 15-year-old Caleb Sharp brought a rifle and handgun to school, carrying out an attack that claimed the life of Sam Strahan and injured 3 other students. At his recent sentencing, Sharp, now 20, received a 40-year prison sentence with eligibility for a sentencing review after 35 years. The decision came after intense arguments from both sides. Judge Michael Price, delivering the ruling, explained that due to Sharp's juvenile status at the time of the attack, he could not impose a life sentence without parole under Washington state law. Instead, he balanced the severity of the crime with state legal requirements, pointing out rehabilitation over retribution for juvenile offenders. The sentence allows Sharp to seek release from a sentencing review board, which will assess his rehabilitation and risk of reoffending. This board could ultimately decide if Sharp has made enough progress to reintegrate into society safely. Sharp had 30 days to appeal the sentence, although his attorney, Brooke Foley, argued that he deserved a lower sentence, citing his age, mental health, and potential for change. Foley said that as a teenager, Sharp's immaturity should be taken into account, hoping he might eventually experience life's milestones after incarceration. Prosecutor Sharon Headland, however, contended that Sharp's actions were deliberate and violent, warranting a sentence that prioritizes community safety. During the hearing, a painful silence filled the courtroom as surveillance footage of the shooting was shown. Amy Strahan, mother of Sam Strahan, watched in heartbreak as footage depicted her son's attempt to confront Sharp, only to lose his life. Sharp, meanwhile, sat still, while his parents visibly struggled to endure the painful moments on screen.
Scars on their bodies and their minds that I can never erase or take back. And most of all, I am sorry to Amy and Emily for taking Sam from them.
In his statement, Sharp offered an apology for his actions, expressing regret for the pain caused to the Strahan family, the injured students, and the Freeman community.
And from that point on till now, evil has no place in my heart. Not after I saw that price. I don't live to myself anymore. I can't.
However, the memory of the terror and loss inflicted upon the school remains deep. Our next case is a bit unique. The shooter felt remorse while still on a rampage and, in their own words, just couldn't do it.
Could have shot her, but I just couldn't do it.
Sky Bush. Appearing in court, Sky Bush, now 22, accepted the plea deal negotiated by his lawyer, Daniel Gonzalez. Bush's grandmother, Linda Costello, attended the sentencing in person, voicing her support by describing him as a nice person who deeply regrets his actions. Just before lunchtime on April 20th, 2018, the students of Forest High School in Ocala, Florida, were going about their usual day, hanging out, chatting, and preparing for their next class. For most of them, it was an ordinary Friday, but for 19-year-old Sky Bush, the The day had a very different meaning. He was carrying a dark plan that he would soon set in motion. Sky had walked into the school with a sawed-off shotgun hidden in a guitar case. He'd been thinking about this moment, convinced that his actions would somehow make a statement. But when the time came, all his actions caused was fear and pain. He slipped into a classroom, loaded his gun, and fired a shot, hitting 17-year-old Dylan Ewald. Dylan, caught off guard, was left injured and in shock. Suddenly, the school was thrown into chaos. Students ran and hid in classrooms or raced for the exits. Teachers tried to keep everyone calm and safe, even as panic took over. As Bush walked through the school halls, he was eerily calm, not shouting or running. When the police arrived, he didn't resist. He seemed relieved it was over. Once in custody, Sky started talking about why he did it. He said he felt angry and ignored by the world, though he didn't have any specific problem with his classmates. He admitted he had been fascinated by violence, but also felt sorry for what he'd done.
When did you order the gun? When did you get the gun?
I went on arms list.
In court, Sky's lawyers argued that his struggles with mental health were behind his actions. But for the families, students, and teachers of Forest High, those reasons didn't ease the pain. In the end, Sky Bush was sentenced to 30 years in prison for the shooting. His punishment also includes 30 years of probation following his release, along with a minimum of 25 years of mandatory prison time, restitution payments exceeding $14,000, and a mental health evaluation.
I'm not a bad person, but I made mistakes.
Brandon Spencer. Brandon Spencer's story is one of a young man's life shattered by one impulsive, violent choice. In 2012, Spencer, then just 19, headed to a Halloween party on the USC campus. But it wasn't just any party for him. He was out for revenge. When he spotted a member of a rival gang, Gino Hall, he couldn't let go of the past. The previous year, Spencer had been shot, and he blamed Hall. So, he left the party, returned with a gun, and opened fire on the crowd, aiming to settle the score. As Hall and others ran in terror, 4 people, including Hall, were hit. Spencer's actions left a scene of chaos and fear, with students fleeing for their lives. Despite the terror he caused, Spencer's defense argued he wasn't the shooter, or if he was, he had only intended to hurt Hall and not the bystanders. Spencer's family claimed racial bias was at play, saying that USC and prosecutors targeted him unfairly because of his race. In the end, a jury didn't buy the defense's arguments. After just 3 hours of deliberation, they found Spencer guilty. At his sentencing, however, things took a dramatic turn.
I'm not a bad person, but I made mistakes. But I'm not just some gangbanger that she tried to portray me as.
When the judge handed him a 40-year prison sentence, the minimum he could get, Spencer lost control. He broke down, sobbing, banging his head on the table, and pleading that he couldn't bear to spend his life in prison. Spencer argued he had dreams and wasn't a true gang member, hoping the judge would take pity on him. But his emotional reaction did little to sway the court.
Sorry for what happened, Your Honor, but life in prison.
The prosecution saw Spencer's actions as reckless and deserving of severe punishment, stressing that this wasn't just an isolated act, but part of a troubling pattern where young men carry guns without thinking of the consequences, just like the criminal in our next case. Ethan Crumbley, Oakland County Superior Court. Ethan Crumbley, a Michigan teen, will spend his life in prison without parole for a shocking and calculated attack at Oxford High School in 2021. At just 15, he took a gun from his home, hid it in his backpack, and unleashed terror on his classmates, killing 4 and wounding 6 others, including a teacher. His motive? He allegedly wanted popularity. During sentencing, Crumbley didn't deny responsibility.
I am a really bad person. I have done terrible things that no one should ever do.
Judge Kwame Rowe, however, was unswayed, pointing out the deliberate brutality of the crimes.
Sentences of the court is that defendant shall serve life without the possibility of parole.
As the first minor to receive a life sentence without parole since a 2012 Supreme Court ruling against such sentences for most young offenders, Crumbley's case stands out for the court's clear stance on the severity of his actions. The sentencing was emotional, beginning with a heart-wrenching statement from Nicole Beausoleil, mother of Madison Baldwin, one of the victims. She recounted the devastation of identifying her daughter's body and described how her once vibrant child was now a lifeless statistic.
We wear the pain like a heavy coat, constant reminders every day. every hour is the darkest time of the day.
Several victims' relatives directly addressed Crumbly, many pointing out how their loved ones would have extended kindness to him if he'd just asked. But, instead, his actions brought permanent pain and grief to their lives. Next, how would you feel if a school shooter saw his actions as an experiment to observe how students and society would react? Yes, these were his exact words being read in court.
I don't really know. I just kind of felt like it, I guess.
This is the story of Gabe Parker. On a cold January morning in 2018, Marshall County High School was buzzing with its usual noise. Teenagers gathering in the commons, chatting and laughing as they waited for classes to begin. But the routine shattered at 7:57 a.m. when 15-year-old Gabe Parker, a quiet sophomore, pulled out a handgun and began firing into the crowd.
I saw the flashes from the gunshots, and by that time I was just running.
It all happened so fast. Witnesses later said he looked lifeless, moving without expression as he aimed and pulled the trigger over and over. In those terrifying seconds, 2 students, both 15, were struck down. The gunfire left 14 others wounded, some critically, while panic and chaos swept through the school. Screams filled the hallways. Students dropped their books and bags, running in every direction. Some ran outside, scaling fences or bolting for the cover of nearby woods. Others dashed into classrooms, locking doors and hiding in fear, while a few tried to help friends who'd been hit. In the chaos, Parker discarded the gun and joined his classmates, hiding as though he was just another frightened kid. Some of his peers, unaware he was the shooter, motioned for him to join them in safety, but one student recognized him and tipped off a teacher, who immediately contacted law enforcement. By 8:06 a.m., Parker was in police custody, taken away from the campus that he had turned into a scene of horror. During his interrogation, Parker was unnervingly detached. He admitted he'd decided the night before to steal his stepfather's gun, weighing the pros and cons of what he would do. To him, life had no meaning, his or anyone else's, and the shooting, he claimed, was a twisted experiment to see how people would react.
I don't see good when I look at Gabe Parker. He has no remorse and no conscience. I see evil, pure evil.
Investigators later found disturbing evidence in his belongings, including a copy of Mein Kampf and other dark readings. Charged with 2 counts of murder and multiple counts of assault, he was tried as an adult. Parker pleaded guilty in 2020, knowing he couldn't receive life without parole due to Kentucky laws on minors. Instead, he received 2 life sentences plus 70 years, with eligibility for parole after 20 years. As he was sentenced, he showed absolutely no remorse. The sentencing hearing was emotional, with victim impact statements that brought the horror back to life. The families of Bailey Holt and Preston Cope, the 2 students Parker had killed, spoke of dreams shattered, empty chairs at family gatherings, and a future forever tainted by pain.
She was the most precious, beautiful, and selfless soul on this earth, and you took her from us.
In the end, Parker's mother could only offer a tearful apology, a small solace to families haunted by the memory of that morning. Finally, the terrible story of TJ Lane.
You murdered my son, Danny. You are a killer. You are a pathetic excuse for a human being. In fact, you're not even a human being. You don't deserve to be called human. You're a monster.
TJ Lane's sentencing day was one that the Chardon High School community had both dreaded and awaited. The families of his victims, many of whom had spent countless nights replaying the tragic events, were looking for justice, if not closure. But what unfolded in that courtroom shocked everyone, revealing just how far Lane was from redemption. With an almost theatrical nonchalance, Lane walked into court and unbuttoned his blue dress shirt to reveal a white t-shirt with "Killer" scrawled across the front, a sickening homage to the shirt he'd worn on the day he opened fire on his classmates. The sight alone was enough to send chills down the spine of every family member present. Lane, who had murdered 3 students and maimed several others in a calculated attack, was not there to repent. He was there to taunt. As the judge began listing Lane's horrific crimes, the young man looked out at the families, not with remorse but with a smirk creeping across his face. Then, against the advice of his defense counsel, he leaned forward, eyes cold and unfeeling, and delivered a shocking statement directly to the grieving families.
Saying pull the trigger, the killer's done, no memory.
He raised his middle finger, showing his lack of regret with an obscene gesture that silenced the entire room. Gasps echoed in the courtroom. Some parents clutched their hands over their mouths, unable to comprehend the level of depravity they were witnessing. Geauga County Prosecutor Jim Flays, visibly shaken, tried to regain his composure. According to him, Lane is a cold, calculated killer with no sense of humanity. He recounted how Lane had sat in the cafeteria that February morning, watching his unsuspecting classmates, his eyes fixed, his mind made up. The prosecutor described how Lane had aimed with precision, shooting at his victims' heads and ensuring maximum damage. Even as students scrambled, he chased down one boy and delivered a fatal shot to his neck before fleeing.
Nick is a very kind and loving. Why would you want to hurt him? You don't know kind. You're evil.
Judge David Fury, sensing the tension in the room, addressed Lane with the harshest words he could muster. An expression of genuine remorse is relevant because, without it, an offender is likely to re-offend, he said, his voice filled with conviction. But with Lane, there was no remorse, just defiance. So the court found him to be extremely dangerous. The judge then handed down Lane's sentence: 3 consecutive life terms without parole, plus additional years for the others he'd left wounded and scarred. Lane's reaction, a smirk. His family, seated just feet away, was frozen. His grandmother shook her head, looking away in shame, while his mother cried silently. For the victims' families, it was a bitter victory, knowing that Lane's punishment would never bring back their children. Thanks for joining us today. Check out our other videos for more thrilling court stories.